She was mocked at air traffic control, then guided 12 jets through the storm Maya. Chen was 22 when she first heard the symphony of controlled chaos that flows through an air traffic control tower. The voices crackling through headsets, the beep of radar screens, the urgent but measured tones of controllers guiding massive aircraft through invisible highways in the sky. She had stumbled into the observation deck of Terminal Control Center during a college field trip, but while her classmates focused on the impressive technology, Maya heard something deeper. She heard the music of precision, the ballet of coordination, the life and death poetry of split-second decisions made with absolute confidence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What none of her classmates knew, what none of the controllers working below could have guessed, was that Maya had been studying air traffic patterns from her bedroom window for 6 years. Her apartment sat directly under the approach path to Metropolitan International Airport, and every night she tracked the lights moving across the darkness, timing their intervals, noting their altitudes, understanding their dance in a way that went beyond casual observation. She had taught herself to read the sky like others read books, but that knowledge remained locked inside her, dismissed as the quirky hobby of someone who would never belong in that world. Maya's mother, Elena, worked the overnight cleaning shift at Metropolitan International's Terminal Control Center, a job she had held for 12 years since Maya's father disappeared when Maya was 10. Elena Chen arrived at 11 each evening with her cart of supplies and her quiet dignity, moving through the control room like a ghost while the controllers focused on their screens and radios. She emptied trash bins beside workstations where split-second decisions prevented mid-air collisions, mopped floors where careers were made and lost based on reaction times measured in heartbeats, and wiped down equipment that guided hundreds of thousands of passengers safely through the most congested airspace on the continent. Maya often accompanied her mother during school breaks and summer vacations, sitting quietly in the break room with her homework while Elena worked. The controllers barely noticed her presence, treating her like another piece of furniture that belonged to the cleaning staff. She was just Elena's daughter, the quiet girl who never spoke unless spoken to, and seemed content to study her textbooks while the real work of aviation happened around her. But Maya was absorbing everything. She memorized call signs before she understood what they meant, learned to distinguish between different aircraft types by the sound of their radio transmissions, and began to recognize the subtle stress patterns in controllers' voices that indicated developing problems. By the age of 16, she could predict weather delays before they were officially announced and spot potential traffic conflicts that wouldn't become apparent to others. For several minutes, her fascination with air traffic control went far beyond passive observation. Maya had discovered that her local library's computer system could access archived audio from air traffic control communications, officially available for research and educational purposes. She spent countless hours listening to recordings of busy approach sequences, emergency situations, and the kind of complex coordination that separated competent controllers from exceptional ones. She began to understand that air traffic control wasn't just about giving directions to aircraft. It was about seeing patterns in three-dimensional space, predicting the intentions of dozens of pilots simultaneously, and maintaining absolute situational awareness while everything moved at speeds that left no room for error. The controller she admired most was someone she had never met, but whose voice she knew better than her own family's. Harrison Wells worked the evening shift in Terminal Approach, handling the most complex traffic during the busiest hours of the day. Maya had been listening to his communications for 3 years, studying his techniques and marveling at his ability to maintain calm precision, even during the most chaotic situations. Wells had a gift for seeing traffic conflicts before they developed and solving problems with solutions that seemed effortless but revealed themselves as brilliant when Maya analyzed them later. What Maya didn't know was that Wells had been struggling lately. The stress of controlling increasingly busy airspace with understaffed shifts and aging equipment was taking its toll on even the most experienced controllers. Several veteran controllers had transferred to smaller facilities or taken early retirement, leaving Metropolitan's approach control critically short-handed during peak hours. The Federal Aviation Administration had been pushing for increased efficiency, while cutting training budgets and extending mandatory retirement ages, creating a perfect storm of overworked controllers trying to handle traffic loads that exceeded safe capacity. Maya discovered this crisis through overhead conversations during her mother's shifts. She learned that approach control was operating with minimum staffing levels, that controllers were working mandatory overtime that left them exhausted during crucial evening hours, and that several near-miss incidents had occurred during the past month. The facility was under investigation by federal safety inspectors, and rumors suggested that if performance didn't improve quickly, Metropolitan might lose its designation as a major approach control facility. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that she spent every evening in a building where people desperately needed help she could provide, but the gap between her knowledge and her position seemed impossible to bridge. She was Elena's daughter, the cleaning lady's kid who sat quietly in corners and never caused trouble. Even if she somehow found the courage to speak up, who would believe that a college student with no formal training could contribute anything meaningful to professional air traffic control? The answer came on a Tuesday evening in late September when Maya overheard a conversation that changed everything. She was sitting in the break room, supposedly studying for a calculus exam, but actually listening to approach control communications through the partially open door. Controller Sarah Martinez was training a new hire named David Thompson, walking him through the complex sequence of managing arrivals during the evening rush. Thompson was struggling. Maya could hear the hesitation in his voice as he attempted to sequence aircraft that were arriving too close together from multiple directions. Martinez kept intervening to prevent conflicts, her voice growing more tense with each correction. Finally, Maya heard something that made her blood run cold. Thompson had cleared 2 aircraft for the same approach path at altitudes that would create a collision risk in less than 3 minutes. Maya stood up without thinking, her chair scraping against the floor. Through the open door, she could see Martinez frantically working her radio, trying to separate the aircraft while Thompson stared at his radar screen in confusion. The situation was developing exactly as Maya had predicted it would based on the traffic pattern she had been tracking for the previous 20 minutes. Elena noticed her daughter's sudden movement and followed her gaze toward the control room. Maya's hands were clenched into fists, her body rigid with the effort of staying quiet while she watched a crisis unfold that she knew how to solve. Elena had seen this look before, the expression Maya wore when she was working through complex problems that others couldn't see. The crisis resolved when Martinez issued rapid-fire instructions that separated the aircraft with less than a mile to spare. Both planes landed safely, but Maya could see the shaken expression on Thompson's face and the frustrated exhaustion in Martinez's posture. As the immediate danger passed, Maya heard Martinez's voice through the radio, sharp with stress and fatigue. "Tower, approach. We need to discuss staffing levels for tomorrow's shift." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We can't continue operating with minimal backup during training periods. Maya returned to her calculus book, but the equations blurred as she thought about what she had just witnessed. She knew the traffic pattern that had created the conflict, understood the solution that Martinez had implemented, and could see 3 different ways the situation could have been prevented entirely. But that knowledge felt useless while she sat in a break room, invisible and unheard. That night, Maya made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She would find a way to contribute her knowledge to the facility where her mother worked, where people she had never met were struggling with problems she understood better than they realized. She didn't know how she would bridge the gap between her position and her abilities, but she could no longer sit quietly while solutions remained locked inside her head. The first step was gathering proof of her knowledge in a way that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Maya spent the following week documenting traffic patterns during her mother's shifts, creating detailed analyses of conflict situations, and proposing alternative solutions. She recorded radio communications and created timing charts that demonstrated her understanding of complex coordination sequences. By the end of the week, she had compiled a folder of observations that would have impressed experienced controllers, if any of them had been willing to look at work produced by the cleaning lady's daughter. Maya's opportunity came through an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Foster, her aviation management professor, had mentioned during class that she was conducting research on air traffic control efficiency for a federal study. Maya approached her after class, carrying her folder of observations and a carefully prepared explanation of her background. Dr. Foster was initially skeptical. Students often claimed expertise they didn't possess, and air traffic control was a field where theoretical knowledge meant nothing without practical application. But as Maya began explaining her analyses, Foster's skepticism transformed into amazement. The level of detail and accuracy in Maya's work exceeded what she typically saw from graduate students who had been studying air traffic control for years. "Maya, where did you learn this?" Foster asked, studying a chart that showed predicted traffic conflicts with remarkable precision. "From listening," Maya replied simply. "My mother works overnight cleaning at Metropolitan Approach. I've been there during most of her shifts for the past 6 years. I started paying attention to the patterns, and eventually I began to understand them." Foster spent the next hour reviewing Maya's documentation, asking increasingly technical questions that Maya answered with confidence and depth. Finally, Foster leaned back in her chair with an expression of disbelief. "Maya, this analysis is better than work I've seen from controllers with 20 years of experience. You've identified traffic management techniques that most facilities haven't implemented yet." She paused, studying Maya's face carefully. "What do you want to do with this knowledge?" "I want to help," Maya said. "The facility is understaffed and struggling with traffic loads that exceed safe capacity. I have solutions for problems they're facing, but I need someone to take my ideas seriously." Foster nodded slowly. "There might be a way to do that. The Federal Aviation Administration is conducting efficiency evaluations at major facilities. This month, Metropolitan is scheduled for review next week. If your analysis is as valuable as I think it is, this could be the perfect opportunity to present your ideas to people who have the authority to implement them." Maya felt her heart racing with possibility and terror. For 6 years, her knowledge had been a private obsession, something she pursued in silence without any expectation that it would matter to anyone else. Now she was facing the prospect of presenting her ideas to federal inspectors and experienced controllers who would judge her work against professional standards she had never been formally taught. But the alternative was continuing to sit quietly while people struggled with problems she could solve, watching traffic conflicts develop that she could prevent, and knowing that her silence might contribute to the kind of accident that destroyed lives and careers. The following week, Maya found herself in the most unlikely position of her life. Dr. Foster had arranged for her to present her traffic management analysis to the FAA evaluation team as part of their facility review. Maya would have 15 minutes to demonstrate her understanding of Metropolitan's approach control operations and propose improvements based on her observations. Maya spent 3 days preparing for the presentation, organizing her 6 years of informal study into a coherent proposal that addressed the facility's most pressing challenges. She identified peak traffic periods when conflicts were most likely to develop, proposed revised approach sequences that would increase efficiency while maintaining safety margins, and demonstrated her ability to predict aircraft behavior with accuracy that bordered on prescient. The night before her presentation, Maya sat in the break room during her mother's shift, listening to approach control communications with new intensity. Tomorrow she would step out of the shadows where she had spent 6 years learning and prove that knowledge could come from the most unexpected places. She would show them that the invisible girl who sat quietly in corners had been seeing patterns they missed, understanding problems they couldn't solve, and developing solutions they desperately needed. Elena noticed her daughter's nervous energy and sat beside her during a brief break from her cleaning duties. "Mia, you've been carrying this knowledge for so long. Tomorrow you finally get to share it with people who can use it." Maya nodded, too nervous to speak. She thought about all the evenings she had spent in this building, all the conversations she had overheard, all the traffic patterns she had memorized. Tomorrow would determine whether 6 years of passionate study had been preparation for this moment, or just the elaborate fantasy of someone who would never belong in the world she loved. The presentation was scheduled for 10 in the morning, during a relatively quiet period between the morning arrival rush and the afternoon departure push. Maya arrived early, wearing her best professional clothes and carrying a folder that contained 6 years of accumulated knowledge about Metropolitan's approach control operations. The evaluation team consisted of 3 FAA inspectors, the facility manager, the approach control supervisor, and 2 senior controllers including Harrison Wells, whose voice Maya had been studying for years, but whom she was meeting for the first time. As she walked into the conference room, Maya felt the weight of their combined skepticism. To them, she was an unknown college student who claimed to understand air traffic control despite having no formal training or certification. Maya began her presentation with a detailed analysis of Metropolitan's traffic patterns during peak hours, identifying specific choke points where delays typically developed and conflicts were most likely to occur. She presented data showing the correlation between controller fatigue and incident rates, and demonstrated her understanding of the complex coordination required between different sectors of approach control. As she spoke, Maya watched the expressions of her audience change from skeptical indifference to surprised attention. Her analysis wasn't the work of an amateur enthusiast. It was a comprehensive study that revealed insights they hadn't recognized themselves. She had identified problems they were struggling with and proposed solutions that were both practical and immediately implementable. Harrison Wells was the first to ask a question. "Miss Chen, your analysis of evening approach sequences is remarkably detailed. How did you gather this data?" Maya took a deep breath. "My mother works overnight cleaning here. I've spent most evenings in the building for the past 6 years, listening to control communications and tracking traffic patterns. I started keeping records 3 years ago when I realized I could predict conflicts before they developed." The room fell silent. Maya could see the facility manager and controllers exchanging glances, processing the implications of what she had just told them. The cleaning lady's daughter had been sitting in their break room for years, quietly studying their operations with a level of attention and analysis that exceeded their own self-evaluation efforts. Dr. Foster, who had been invited to observe the presentation, spoke into the silence. "Maya has documented her observations with remarkable precision. I've reviewed her work extensively, and it represents a level of traffic analysis that would be valuable at any major facility." One of the FAA inspectors leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, you've identified several traffic management issues that we've observed during our evaluation. Do you have specific recommendations for addressing these problems?" Maya felt her confidence building as she moved into the portion of her presentation she had been most eager to share. She outlined a revised approach sequence that would reduce delays during peak hours by 18%, while maintaining required safety separations. She proposed modified coordination procedures between sectors that would eliminate the communication delays that contributed to most traffic conflicts. Most importantly, she demonstrated solutions for the staffing crisis that had been forcing controllers to work beyond safe fatigue limits. As Maya concluded her presentation, she looked around the room at faces that had transformed from skepticism to amazement. These were experienced professionals who had spent careers in air traffic control, and they were looking at her with expressions she had never seen directed toward her before: respect, recognition, and something approaching awe. The facility manager was the first to respond. "Ms. Chen, your analysis is extraordinary. You've identified operational improvements that could significantly enhance both safety and efficiency. I'm curious about your background in aviation. Where did you receive your training?" "I didn't," Maya replied honestly. "Everything I know about air traffic control comes from observation and study. I've never taken a formal course or received official training. I just listened and learned." Harrison Wells shook his head in disbelief. "You've been studying our operations for 6 years from the break room, and you understand traffic management better than controllers who have been working here for decades. That's remarkable." The evaluation concluded with a recommendation that Maya be offered immediate consideration for accelerated controller training, pending completion of standard certification requirements. The FAA inspectors noted that her analysis had identified operational improvements worth implementing immediately, and suggested that her observational methods might be valuable for training programs at other facilities. As the meeting ended and participants filed out of the conference room, Maya felt 6 years of invisibility lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she had been seen not as Elena's daughter or the quiet girl who sat in corners, but as someone whose knowledge and insights were valuable enough to change how an entire facility operated. But Maya's transformation from invisible observer to recognized expert was just beginning. The real test would come when her theoretical knowledge met the practical demands of actual air traffic control, where the stakes were measured in lives rather than academic presentations, and where there was no margin for error when aircraft filled the sky during the kind of storm that challenged even the most experienced controllers. The opportunity to prove herself would come sooner than anyone expected, on a night when Metropolitan's approach control would face its greatest challenge in years, and when Maya's 6 years of patient observation would be tested in the crucible of an emergency that demanded every skill she had developed in the shadows. 3 weeks after Maya's presentation to the FAA evaluation team, she found herself standing outside the personnel office at Metropolitan International Airport, holding an official letter that still felt surreal in her hands. The Federal Aviation Administration had fast-tracked her application for air traffic control training, citing exceptional analytical capabilities and demonstrated understanding of complex airspace management. What typically required months of waiting lists and competitive selection had been compressed into a streamlined process that would have her starting preliminary training within days. The letter also contained something unexpected: a temporary position as a traffic management coordinator while she completed her certification requirements. It wasn't controller status yet, but it would put her inside the operational environment, where she could apply her knowledge under supervised conditions. For Maya, who had spent 6 years as an invisible observer, the prospect of actually participating in air traffic control operations felt like stepping through a doorway into a different universe. But not everyone at Metropolitan was thrilled about Maya's rapid promotion from the cleaning staff's family member to operational personnel. Deputy Chief Controller Marcus Webb had been working air traffic control for 28 years, rising through the ranks with the methodical patience that characterized old-school aviation professionals. To Webb, Maya represented everything wrong with modern FAA policy: shortcuts that bypassed proven training systems, preferential treatment based on academic theories rather than practical experience, and the dangerous assumption that understanding patterns was equivalent to managing real aircraft with real people aboard. Webb had been present during Maya's presentation, watching from the back of the room with increasing irritation as inspectors and facility management praised analysis that he considered impressive but irrelevant. Air traffic control wasn't about identifying patterns from comfortable observation positions. It was about making split-second decisions under pressure while maintaining absolute situational awareness in three-dimensional space. The gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application had destroyed promising careers, and Webb was convinced that Maya would discover this gap the moment she attempted to control actual aircraft. His concerns weren't entirely without merit. Maya's knowledge, however extensive, had been acquired through passive observation rather than active participation. She had never worn a headset during peak traffic periods, never felt the pressure of dozens of aircraft depending on her decisions, never experienced the adrenaline surge that accompanied potential conflicts, developing faster than human reaction time could address them. The controllers who worked with Webb had earned their positions through rigorous training programs that tested them under simulated stress, conditions designed to reveal weaknesses before they became dangerous. Maya's first day as traffic management coordinator began at 6 in the morning, during the pre-dawn quiet period when overnight cargo flights were completing their approaches and early morning commercial traffic was beginning to build. She was assigned to work alongside senior controller Patricia Kim, a 15-year veteran who had volunteered to mentor Maya through her initial operational exposure. Kim had read Maya's analysis and was genuinely impressed by the depth of understanding it demonstrated, but she also shared Webb's concerns about the gap between observation and execution. Her approach to training Maya would be methodical and cautious, starting with basic coordination tasks and gradually increasing responsibility as Maya demonstrated competency at each level. The first challenge came within hours of Maya's arrival. A United Airlines flight approaching from the west reported equipment malfunction that would require emergency landing procedures, and a Southwest flight on the same approach path needed immediate rerouting to prevent conflicts. Kim handled the primary coordination while Maya monitored secondary communications, but Maya could see the solution forming in her mind several minutes before it became apparent to others. The Southwest flight was being directed through a longer route that would delay its arrival by 15 minutes and consume additional fuel, but Maya recognized an alternative approach vector that would maintain required separation while reducing delay to less than 5 minutes. She watched Kim work through the standard procedure, wanting to suggest the alternative, but uncertain about when trainee input would be appropriate or welcome. Kim noticed Maya's focused attention and invited her to share her observations. Maya described the alternative routing with precise detail, including altitude changes and timing requirements that would optimize the solution. Kim studied the proposal for several moments before implementing a modified version that incorporated Maya's insights while maintaining additional safety margins. The emergency landing proceeded without complications, and the Southwest flight arrived only 6 minutes late rather than the 15-minute delay that standard procedures would have required. Kim was impressed by Maya's ability to visualize complex three-dimensional solutions, but she also noted the confidence with which Maya had presented her analysis. Confidence was essential for air traffic control, but overconfidence could be lethal. Word of Maya's successful first-day contribution spread through the facility faster than she expected. Controllers who had been skeptical about her rapid promotion began paying attention to her work, while others remained convinced that beginner's luck would inevitably give way to real-world challenges that would expose her limitations. Deputy Chief Webb decided to test those limitations more directly. On Maya's third day, he assigned her to coordinate with terminal radar approach control during the afternoon arrival rush, a period when multiple runways were operating simultaneously. and coordination between different sectors required split-second timing and absolute precision. The assignment was deliberately challenging for someone with Maya's limited operational experience. Terminal coordination involved managing aircraft handoffs between different controllers while maintaining awareness of multiple approach sequences that could affect each other in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Experienced coordinators developed intuitive understanding of these interactions through years of practice, but Maya would be attempting complex coordination after less than a week of supervised training. Maya accepted the assignment with nervous determination, knowing that Webb was testing her and that failure would provide ammunition for those who questioned her qualifications. She spent her lunch break reviewing approach charts and traffic flow procedures, preparing for coordination scenarios that could develop during the afternoon rush. The test began mildly enough. Maya successfully coordinated several routine handoffs between approach sectors, demonstrating her understanding of basic communication protocols and separation requirements. But Webb had arranged for her to work during a particularly complex traffic period when weather conditions would add variables that challenged even experienced coordinators. A line of thunderstorms was approaching from the southwest, requiring aircraft to deviate from standard approach paths while maintaining separation from other traffic that was also adjusting routes to avoid weather. Maya found herself coordinating between 3 different approach sectors, while aircraft reported turbulence that was affecting their ability to maintain assigned altitudes and speeds. The complexity escalated when an American Airlines flight reported severe turbulence that required immediate altitude change, placing it in conflict with a Delta flight that was already deviating around weather. Maya had to coordinate new routing for both aircraft while maintaining awareness of 6 other flights that could be affected by the changes. For the first time since beginning her operational training, Maya felt the crushing weight of real responsibility. These weren't theoretical problems with academic solutions. They were actual aircraft with hundreds of passengers whose safety depended on her ability to maintain separation while accommodating weather deviations that changed faster than standard procedures could address. Maya's voice remained steady as she coordinated the conflicts, but she could feel her heart racing as she processed multiple variables simultaneously. The American flight needed immediate clearance to a higher altitude, but that altitude was occupied by the Delta flight, which couldn't descend due to other traffic below. The solution required coordinating with 3 different sectors to create a corridor through existing traffic that would accommodate both aircraft without creating new conflicts. She visualized the 3-dimensional puzzle in her mind, seeing the movement patterns of 8 aircraft across different altitudes and approach vectors. The solution formed gradually, requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple controllers. But Maya could see how all the pieces would fit together if everyone executed their part of the sequence correctly. Maya began issuing coordination instructions with increasing confidence, directing aircraft through a complex series of altitude and heading changes that created the separation corridors needed for safe weather deviations. Controllers in different sectors responded to her directions, trusting her coordination even though several of them had never worked with her before. The sequence unfolded exactly as Maya had visualized. Both flights navigated around the weather safely, maintaining required separation throughout the process, and all 8 aircraft in the affected airspace completed their approaches without delays or additional complications. The coordination had required managing 12 different clearance changes across 4 sectors, executed with timing precision that left no margin for error. When the last aircraft was safely on the ground, Maya realized that the control room had grown unusually quiet. Controllers who had been focused on their own sectors were looking in her direction with expressions that ranged from surprise to incredulity. Patricia Kim was staring at her console as if she couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Deputy Chief Webb approached Maya's position with an expression she couldn't read. She braced herself for criticism or complaints about procedures. she might have overlooked in the complexity of managing multiple deviations simultaneously. Instead, Webb studied her coordination log for several minutes before speaking. "Chen, that weather deviation sequence you just coordinated, how long have you been practicing those procedures?" "I haven't, sir," Maya replied honestly. "I was working through the solution as the situation developed." Webb's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching concern. "You coordinated 8 aircraft through weather deviations using procedures that typically require months of specialized training. You did it in real time, under pressure, with no supervision." Maya wasn't sure whether Webb's tone indicated approval or alarm. "Is there a problem with how I handled the coordination?" "The problem is that you shouldn't have been able to handle it at all," Webb said bluntly. "What you just accomplished was the kind of complex coordination that separates senior controllers from everyone else. You've been here 3 days." Patricia Kim had been reviewing the radar data from Maya's coordination sequence, and she approached with printouts that documented the aircraft movements. "Maya, look at these tracks. You maintained perfect separation throughout the entire sequence. The timing was precise enough that every aircraft finished within 30 seconds of their original scheduled arrival time, despite major weather deviations." Maya studied the printouts, seeing the graphic representation of movements she had coordinated by visualizing 3-dimensional relationships in her mind. The tracks showed aircraft weaving through complex patterns that had allowed them to avoid weather while maintaining separation from each other and arriving on schedule. To Maya, it had felt like solving a puzzle with pieces that moved in predictable patterns, but the printouts revealed coordination that looked almost choreographed in its precision. Other controllers began gathering around Maya's position, studying the radar tracks and discussing the coordination techniques she had employed. Several of them had never seen weather deviations managed with such efficiency, and they were trying to understand how someone with minimal training had executed procedures that challenged experienced professionals. Controller Harrison Wells, whose voice Maya had studied for years, but who was meeting her operationally for the first time, examined the coordination sequence with particular interest. "Maya, when you were planning these routing changes, how did you visualize the aircraft movements?" "I could see the patterns in my mind," Maya explained. "Each aircraft had specific constraints based on weather, traffic, and approach requirements. The solution was finding routing that satisfied all the constraints simultaneously." Wells nodded slowly. "Most controllers develop that kind of spatial visualization after years of experience. Some never develop it at all. You're using it like it's natural instinct." The attention was making Maya uncomfortable, but she was also beginning to understand that her coordination of the weather deviation sequence had been more significant than she realized. She had assumed that all controllers could visualize traffic patterns with the same clarity she experienced, but the reactions around her suggested that her ability to see 3-dimensional solutions might be unusual. Deputy Chief Webb was still studying Maya's coordination log, making notes about procedures and timing that would become part of her training record. Finally, he looked up with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal concern. "Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. What you did today was impressive, but it was also dangerous. You coordinated complex procedures without fully understanding the risks involved. Air traffic control isn't just about finding solutions. It's about managing safety margins that account for human error and equipment failure." Maya felt her confidence deflating. "Did I create unsafe conditions?" "No," Webb admitted. "Your coordination maintained required separation throughout the sequence, but you succeeded through intuition and spatial ability rather than systematic procedure application. That approach works until it doesn't, and when it fails in air traffic control, people die." The criticism stung because Maya recognized the validity of Webb's concerns. She had been operating on instinct and pattern recognition rather than following established procedures that had been developed through decades of experience and accident investigation. Her success with the weather coordination had been real, but it had also been incomplete, lacking the systematic safety consciousness that separated competent controllers from those who eventually caused accidents. Patricia Kim intervened with a perspective that acknowledged both Maya's abilities and Webb's concerns. Maya demonstrated exceptional spatial awareness and coordination skills today. She also needs intensive training on safety procedures and systematic decision-making. Those aren't contradictory observations. Webb nodded reluctantly. Chen, you have natural abilities that could make you an outstanding controller. But natural ability without proper training is dangerous. I'm recommending accelerated but comprehensive certification training. You'll work with experienced controllers on every shift until you understand not just how to coordinate traffic, but why our procedures exist and what happens when they're inadequate. Maya accepted Webb's recommendation with relief and determination. She had proven that her observational knowledge could translate into operational capability, but she had also learned that competence required more than pattern recognition and spatial visualization. Over the following weeks, she would discover that air traffic control demanded constant learning, absolute attention to detail, and the kind of systematic thinking that prevented small mistakes from becoming catastrophic failures. But she would also discover that her natural abilities, combined with proper training, could create capabilities that exceeded what anyone at Metropolitan had expected. The weather coordination sequence had been just the beginning of Maya's operational development, and the real tests of her skills were approaching faster than anyone anticipated. The facility was operating under increasing pressure as winter weather patterns brought more frequent storms and traffic disruptions. Controller fatigue was becoming a chronic problem as mandatory overtime extended shifts beyond safe limits. Equipment failures were occurring more frequently as aging radar systems struggled to handle traffic loads that exceeded their design specifications. Maya's training accelerated through this period of operational stress, giving her exposure to complex situations that would have been phased in gradually under normal circumstances. She worked alongside different controllers during each shift, learning their individual techniques while absorbing the systematic procedures that formed the foundation of safe air traffic control. Controller Sarah Martinez, who had been struggling with training new hires when Maya first observed her, became one of Maya's most valuable mentors. Martinez had 20 years of experience managing high-density traffic, and she understood the difference between technical competence and operational wisdom. She taught Maya that air traffic control required not just coordinating current traffic, but anticipating problems that might develop minutes in the future and positioning aircraft to avoid conflicts before they became apparent. Martinez also taught Maya about controller communication techniques that went beyond standard phraseology. Experienced controllers developed intuitive understanding of pilot capabilities and aircraft performance characteristics that allowed them to optimize traffic flow through subtle adjustments in clearance timing and routing. These skills couldn't be learned from manuals or simulation exercises. They developed through thousands of hours of real-world experience managing actual aircraft with diverse crews and equipment. Under Martinez's guidance, Maya began developing the systematic thinking that Deputy Chief Webb had identified as essential for safe operations. She learned to cross-check her instinctive solutions against procedural requirements, ensuring that spatial visualization was supported by standard safety practices. She practiced coordinating traffic under simulated emergency conditions that tested her ability to maintain systematic decision-making under pressure. Most importantly, Maya learned to recognize the limitations of her knowledge and to ask for assistance when situations exceeded her current capabilities. Air traffic control required controllers to acknowledge uncertainty rather than guessing about solutions that could affect aircraft safety. Pride and overconfidence had contributed to more accidents than technical incompetence, and experienced controllers had learned to value caution over cleverness. Maya's development accelerated dramatically when she began working evening shifts. With Harrison Wells, the controller whose voice she had studied for years before meeting him operationally. Wells had developed an approach to traffic management that emphasized efficiency without compromising safety, and he was known for his ability to handle complex traffic situations with calm precision that made difficult coordination look effortless. Working with Wells revealed the difference between competent air traffic control and exceptional performance. Wells could visualize traffic flow several moves ahead, positioning aircraft for optimal approach sequences while maintaining flexibility to accommodate weather changes or unexpected situations. His communication with pilots was precise and economical, conveying necessary information without unnecessary radio congestion that could interfere with other controllers. Wells also taught Maya about the psychological aspects of air traffic control that weren't covered in technical training. Controllers needed to maintain confident authority in their communications while remaining open to information from pilots who might have different perspectives on developing situations. Balance between assertive control and flexible response required experience that couldn't be simulated in training environments. Under Wells' mentorship, Maya began developing her own approach to traffic management that combined her natural spatial abilities with systematic procedures and communication techniques. She learned to trust her instincts for pattern recognition, while cross-checking solutions against safety requirements and procedural standards. Maya's progress impressed even Deputy Chief Webb, who had been monitoring her development with skeptical attention. After 6 weeks of intensive training, she was handling routine traffic coordination with competence that exceeded many controllers with years of experience. Her weather coordination skills had become legendary among facility personnel and other controllers often requested her assistance when storms required complex traffic deviations. But Maya's most significant test was approaching with the winter storm season that would challenge Metropolitan's approach control beyond anything the facility had experienced in recent years. Weather forecasts indicated that a massive storm system was developing across the central United States, bringing severe turbulence, icing conditions, and visibility restrictions that would affect air traffic throughout the region. The storm was predicted to reach Metropolitan during the evening rush hour on a Friday, when traffic density was already at peak levels and any disruptions would cascade through the entire air traffic system. Preliminary forecasts suggested wind conditions and turbulence that would make standard approach procedures impossible, requiring constant coordination and real-time route adjustments for every aircraft attempting to land. Metropolitan's approach control would be operating with minimum staffing due to several controllers being out sick with seasonal illnesses. The remaining controllers would be managing traffic loads that exceeded safe capacity under normal conditions, while dealing with weather that would require constant attention and split-second decision-making. Maya would be working that Friday evening shift, her first exposure to major weather operations as an operational coordinator rather than an observer. She spent the days leading up to the storm studying weather coordination procedures and reviewing storm management techniques with her mentors. But no amount of preparation could fully simulate the pressure and complexity she would face when 12 aircraft filled with passengers needed guidance through conditions that challenged the limits of both human capability and technological systems. The storm would test every skill Maya had developed through 6 years of observation and 2 months of intensive training. It would also test the confidence of controllers who had learned to trust her abilities and the faith of facility management, who had endorsed her rapid advancement through the air traffic control system. Maya didn't know it yet, but the approaching storm would provide the ultimate validation of her transformation from invisible observer to essential team member. In conditions where there would be no margin for error and no opportunity for second chances. When the weather reached Metropolitan International Airport, Chen would discover whether her natural abilities and intensive training were sufficient for the kind of air traffic control that separated competent professionals from true experts. The storm was still 48 hours away, but Maya could already feel the electricity of anticipation building through the facility as controllers prepared for the most challenging weather operations any of them had faced in years. The first indications of the approaching storm system reached Metropolitan International at 14:30 hours on Friday afternoon, when automated weather sensors began registering pressure drops and wind velocity changes that preceded the main weather front by several hours. Maya was completing her pre-shift briefing with Patricia Kim, reviewing traffic projections and coordination procedures for what was expected to be an exceptionally challenging evening. The National Weather Service had issued updates throughout the day that painted an increasingly ominous picture of the storm's intensity and trajectory. Wind speeds at altitude were projected to reach 70 knots with severe turbulence, extending from ground level to 35,000 feet. Visibility would drop to near-zero conditions with heavy precipitation that would overwhelm aircraft desing systems. Most concerning for air traffic operations, the storm was moving slower than initially predicted, meaning that dangerous conditions would persist throughout the entire evening rush period. Instead of passing quickly through the area, Maya had arrived early for her shift to study the latest meteorological data and coordinate with controllers who would be working adjacent sectors. The storm would affect not just Metropolitan's immediate airspace, but the entire regional air traffic system, creating cascading delays and diversions that would complicate traffic management for hundreds of miles in every direction. Deputy Chief Webb had been monitoring weather developments since dawn, and his expression reflected the gravity of the situation facing his facility. Metropolitan would be operating with 6 controllers instead of the normal 8 due to illness and scheduling conflicts, while managing traffic loads that would require constant coordination and split-second decision-making throughout the storm's duration. Webb called an emergency briefing at 1500 hours, gathering all available controllers to review storm management procedures and coordination protocols. Maya attended the briefing as the newest member of the operational team, but she was no longer the uncertain trainee who had begun working at the facility 2 months earlier. Her weather coordination skills had been tested repeatedly during smaller storms, and controllers throughout the facility had learned to trust her ability to visualize complex traffic solutions under pressure. The briefing revealed the full scope of the challenge they would face. 12 commercial aircraft were scheduled to arrive during the peak storm period, carrying over 2,000 passengers who were depending on Metropolitan's controllers to guide them safely through conditions that would test the limits of both human capability and aircraft performance. Several flights were already reporting severe turbulence during their approach to the area, and pilots were requesting routing changes that would require constant coordination between multiple sectors. Harrison Wells would be working terminal radar approach control, managing aircraft during their final approach phases when weather conditions would be most dangerous. Sarah Martinez would coordinate departures, which would be severely limited due to wind conditions that exceeded safe takeoff parameters for most aircraft types. Patricia Kim would handle high-altitude arrivals, working with controllers at adjacent facilities to route aircraft around weather that extended across multiple states. Maya was assigned to work as primary weather coordinator, a position that required monitoring meteorological conditions across the entire regional airspace while providing real-time routing recommendations to controllers. Managing individual aircraft. It was a responsibility typically reserved for controllers with years of storm management experience, but Maya's demonstrated ability to visualize complex weather patterns had made her the logical choice for the assignment. The storm reached Metropolitan's airspace at 1745 hours, arriving with an intensity that exceeded even the most pessimistic forecasts. Visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile within minutes, while wind gusts at ground level reached 45 knots with higher velocities at altitude. Lightning activity increased dramatically, creating electromagnetic interference that affected radar systems and radio communications throughout the facility. Maya's first challenge came immediately as weather conditions forced the closure of 2 of Metropolitan's 4 runways, concentrating all arrival and departure traffic onto the remaining parallel runways, while aircraft struggled to maintain stability in severe turbulence. The reduced runway capacity meant that normal traffic spacing would be inadequate, requiring precise coordination to prevent conflicts while accommodating aircraft that were fighting unprecedented weather conditions. American Airlines Flight 447 was the first arrival to report severe difficulties, experiencing turbulence that was affecting the crew's ability to maintain assigned altitude and heading. The Boeing 737 was carrying 168 passengers and crew, approaching from the northwest through conditions that were deteriorating faster than weather forecasts had predicted. Maya immediately began coordinating with Harrison Wells to develop alternative routing that would minimize the aircraft's exposure to the worst turbulence while maintaining separation from other traffic. The solution required vectoring the flight through a narrow corridor between 2 thunderstorm cells, timing the approach to avoid conflicts with 3 other aircraft that were also deviating around weather. As Maya provided routing recommendations to Wells, she could hear the stress in the pilot's voice through radio communications that were frequently interrupted by static from lightning activity. The crew was fighting to maintain control of their aircraft while navigating through conditions that pushed the Boeing 737 to its performance limits. Wells acknowledged Maya's routing suggestions and began issuing clearances that would guide American 447 through the weather corridor she had identified. The coordination required precise timing, with the aircraft needing to execute specific heading and altitude changes at exact intervals to avoid both weather hazards and conflicts with other traffic. The approach sequence unfolded with terrifying precision as American 447 navigated through turbulence that was visible on radar as massive cells of precipitation and wind shear. Maya monitored the aircraft's progress while simultaneously coordinating routing for Delta Flight 892, which was approaching from the southeast through equally challenging conditions. Delta 892 reported equipment malfunctions that were affecting their navigation systems, leaving the crew dependent on air traffic control guidance to navigate through weather that had reduced visibility to near-zero conditions. The Airbus A320 was carrying 142 passengers, and the pilots were requesting immediate assistance with routing that would minimize their exposure to severe turbulence. Maya found herself coordinating between Wells and Martinez while monitoring weather conditions that were changing faster than standard procedures could accommodate. She was processing radar data from 6 different aircraft simultaneously, visualizing their 3-dimensional relationships while accounting for weather patterns that were shifting in real time. The coordination became exponentially more complex when United Flight 763 declared an emergency due to severe icing conditions that were affecting the aircraft's control surfaces. The Boeing 757 was approaching from the northeast with 212 passengers aboard, and the crew reported that standard de-icing procedures were inadequate for the conditions they were encountering. Maya immediately recognized that United 763 would require priority routing through the least hazardous weather corridor, but implementing that priority would require repositioning 5 other aircraft while maintaining separation in airspace that was severely constrained by storm conditions. The solution demanded coordination between multiple sectors and precise timing that would allow the emergency aircraft to navigate through weather while other traffic worked around the priority routing. She began issuing coordination recommendations with increasing urgency, directing Wells and Martinez through a sequence of clearances that would create the corridor needed for United 763's emergency approach. The coordination required moving Southwest Flight 228, JetBlue 634, and Alaska Airlines 567 through alternative routing that maintained required separation while accommodating the emergency aircraft's priority status. As the emergency coordination unfolded, Maya was monitoring weather radar that showed the storm intensifying beyond predicted levels. Wind shear conditions were developing near the airport that would make normal approach procedures impossible, requiring constant adjustments to routing and timing for every aircraft attempting to land. The situation reached crisis levels when Continental Flight 951 reported hydraulic system failure that was affecting the crew's ability to maintain precise heading and altitude control. The Boeing 767 was carrying 241 passengers and crew, approaching through turbulence that was exacerbating the aircraft's control difficulties. Maya now found herself coordinating emergency procedures for 2 aircraft simultaneously, while managing normal traffic for 10 additional flights that were all struggling with severe weather conditions. The complexity exceeded anything she had experienced during training, requiring her to process multiple 3-dimensional puzzles while accounting for variables that changed faster than human cognition could typically handle. But Maya's 6 years of pattern observation and intensive training had prepared her for exactly this type of crisis. She could see the entire traffic picture in her mind, visualizing aircraft movements across multiple altitudes and approach vectors while accounting for weather patterns that constrained available routing options. She began issuing coordination instructions with calm precision that impressed even the veteran controllers working around her. Maya directed Wells through a complex sequence of clearances that positioned Continental 951 for an approach that minimized exposure to wind shear while maintaining separation from United 763, which was still completing its emergency approach sequence. The coordination required repositioning 8 aircraft across 4 different altitude levels, creating separation corridors that accommodated 2 emergency situations while maintaining safe traffic flow for normal arrivals. Maya's instructions were precise and economical, conveying essential information without the radio congestion that could interfere with emergency communications. As Continental 951 and United 763 completed their emergency approaches successfully, Maya turned her attention to the 6 remaining aircraft that were still fighting through conditions that continued to deteriorate. American 447 and Delta 892 had landed safely using the routing she had coordinated earlier, but the storm was intensifying in ways that exceeded all previous forecasts. Weather radar showed multiple supercells developing across the approach corridors, creating turbulence and wind shear that would make standard procedures completely inadequate. Maya realized that the remaining aircraft would require continuously updated routing that responded to weather changes occurring every few minutes. She coordinated with Patricia Kim to establish a dynamic routing system that would provide real-time navigation guidance based on weather radar updates that were processed every 90 seconds. The system required constant communication between controllers and continuous coordination adjustments that pushed the facility's capabilities to their absolute limits. Southwest Flight 228 was the next aircraft to report difficulties experiencing turbulence severe enough to injure several passengers despite safety precautions. The Boeing 737 was carrying 153 passengers and crew, and the pilots were requesting immediate routing changes to escape conditions that were exceeding the aircraft's structural design limits. Maya immediately began coordinating alternative routing that would extract Southwest 228 from the worst turbulence while positioning the aircraft for an approach that avoided areas where wind shear was most severe. The solution required cooperation from controllers in 3 different sectors and precise timing that would prevent conflicts with JetBlue 634 and Alaska Airlines 567. The coordination became increasingly difficult as lightning activity intensified, creating electromagnetic interference that affected radar displays and radio communications throughout the facility. Maya found herself working with degraded equipment while managing traffic loads that required perfect information and flawless communication. JetBlue 634 reported navigation system failures that left the crew dependent on air traffic control. Guidance for basic heading and altitude information. The Airbus A320 was carrying 137 passengers through weather that had eliminated visual reference points and overwhelmed the aircraft's automated systems. Maya coordinated with Wells to provide continuous navigation, guidance for JetBlue 634, while simultaneously managing routing for Alaska Airlines 567, which was reporting severe icing conditions similar to those experienced earlier by United 763. The coordination required her to process navigation solutions for multiple aircraft, while monitoring weather conditions that were changing faster than standard coordination procedures could accommodate. The complexity reached unprecedented levels when Frontier Flight 382 declared an emergency due to engine malfunction combined with severe weather damage to the aircraft's exterior surfaces. The Airbus A319 was carrying 121 passengers and crew, and the pilots reported that multiple aircraft systems were failing due to weather-related stress and equipment malfunction. Maya now faced the ultimate test of her abilities, coordinating emergency procedures for 3 aircraft simultaneously while managing normal traffic flow for 5 additional flights, all while working with weather conditions that exceeded the design parameters of both aircraft and air traffic control systems. She could feel the attention of every controller in the facility focused on her coordination efforts, but Maya's mind remained clear and focused on the 3-dimensional puzzle that filled the storm-ravaged airspace around Metropolitan. She could see solutions forming in patterns that incorporated aircraft performance, weather constraints, emergency priorities, and separation requirements into coordinated sequences that would guide every aircraft safely through conditions that challenged the limits of aviation technology. Maya began issuing coordination instructions that managed the entire traffic picture as a single integrated system. She directed Frontier 382 through priority routing that would minimize exposure to turbulence, while the crew dealt with multiple equipment failures. She provided continuous navigation guidance for JetBlue 634 while coordinating weather avoidance. Routing for Alaska Airlines 567. The remaining aircraft, including U.S. Airways 794, Spirit 451, and Virgin America 623, were guided through coordination sequences that Maya visualized as flowing patterns rather than individual clearances. Each aircraft's routing was designed to complement the others, creating traffic flow that accommodated emergency priorities, while maintaining separation and minimizing weather exposure for all flights. As the coordination unfolded, Maya maintained constant awareness of changing weather conditions that required real-time adjustments to her traffic management solutions. She was processing meteorological data, aircraft performance information, pilot reports, and equipment status updates simultaneously while issuing clearances that required split-second timing to prevent conflicts. The storm reached its peak intensity as Maya guided the final 4 aircraft through approach sequences that required continuous coordination adjustments. Lightning strikes were affecting airport equipment, creating additional complications that required backup procedures and alternative coordination methods. Frontier 382 completed its emergency landing successfully despite multiple system failures that had threatened the safety of everyone aboard. JetBlue 634 landed safely using navigation guidance that Maya and Wells had provided throughout the aircraft's instrument approach. Alaska Airlines 567 navigated through severe icing conditions using routing that minimized exposure while maintaining separation from other traffic. The final 3 aircraft, U.S. Airways 794, Spirit 451, and Virgin America 623, completed their approaches as the storm began to weaken, guided through coordination sequences that Maya had continuously adjusted to accommodate changing weather conditions and traffic requirements. When the last aircraft was safely on the ground, Maya realized that the control room had fallen completely silent except for the quiet hum of radar equipment and radio static. Every controller in the facility was looking in her direction with expressions that ranged from amazement to disbelief. Maya had successfully coordinated 12 commercial aircraft through the most severe weather conditions Metropolitan had experienced in over a decade. She had managed 3 simultaneous emergency situations while maintaining traffic flow that prevented delays and minimized weather exposure for over 2,000 passengers and crew members. Deputy Chief Webb approached Maya's position with an expression she had never seen before. His usual skepticism had been replaced by something approaching awe, mixed with professional respect that acknowledged capabilities he had not expected to witness. "Chen," Webb said quietly, "what you accomplished tonight was extraordinary. You coordinated traffic through conditions that would have challenged controllers with decades of experience. You prevented what could have been multiple accidents while maintaining efficiency that exceeded our normal operations." Harrison Wells had been monitoring Maya's coordination throughout the storm, and he joined the conversation with observations that reflected his own amazement at what he had witnessed. "Maya, the way you visualized traffic flow during the emergency sequences, the timing precision you maintained while processing multiple variables simultaneously, I've never seen coordination at that level." Patricia Kim approached with radar printouts that documented Maya's traffic management throughout the storm. The track showed aircraft movements that looked almost choreographed in their precision, with separation maintained throughout sequences that had required constant coordination adjustments and split-second timing. Maya, Kim said, studying the printouts with professional fascination. "These traffic patterns show coordination that maintained perfect separation, while minimizing weather exposure and accommodating emergency priorities. You were processing more variables simultaneously than our computer systems can handle." Other controllers began gathering around Maya's position, discussing coordination techniques she had employed and trying to understand how someone with minimal experience had managed traffic complexity that exceeded anything they had encountered in their careers. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing expressions that reflected the same transformation she had experienced throughout the evening. She was no longer the invisible observer who had spent years learning in silence, nor was she the uncertain trainee who had begun operational work 2 months earlier. She had become an essential member of a team that depended on her abilities to manage the most challenging situations air traffic control could present. The recognition was gratifying, but Maya's satisfaction came from a deeper source. She had used knowledge acquired through 6 years of patient observation and intensive training to guide over 2,000 people safely through conditions that had threatened their lives. The theoretical understanding she had developed in isolation had been transformed into practical capability that made a real difference in the world. As controllers returned to their positions and began processing the paperwork that documented the evening's operations, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the scared college student who had stumbled into the observation deck years earlier, the invisible girl who had listened and learned while others dismissed her as irrelevant, and the determined young woman who had found the courage to step forward when her knowledge could help others. Maya's transformation was complete, but her story was just beginning. The Federal Aviation Administration would review her performance during the storm and recommend her for advanced training programs that would expand her capabilities even further. Other facilities would request her assistance with weather coordination. procedures that could benefit from her unique approach to traffic management. Most importantly, Maya had proven that expertise could develop in unexpected places, that patient observation could create understanding that exceeded formal training, and that the courage to share knowledge could transform both individuals and the systems they served. She had spent 6 years preparing for a moment that had lasted 4 hours, and those 4 hours had validated every minute of preparation. Elena Chen arrived at the facility as the storm was ending, beginning her overnight cleaning shift while controllers completed the documentation that recorded one of the most successful weather operations in Metropolitan's history. As Maya gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she paused to embrace her mother, who had supported her daughter's dreams even when they seemed impossible. "I'm proud of you, Mia," Elena said softly. "You've shown them who you really are." Maya smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. 6 years earlier, she had been the invisible girl who accompanied her mother to work, dismissed by everyone around her as someone who didn't belong in the world of aviation. Tonight, she had guided 12 aircraft through the most dangerous weather conditions any of them had encountered, using skills that had been developed in secret but proved essential when lives depended on her abilities. As Maya walked through the facility toward the parking lot, she passed the break room where she had spent countless evenings listening and learning. While controllers managed traffic, she longed to coordinate herself. The room looked smaller now, not because anything had changed physically, but because her world had expanded beyond the boundaries that had once seemed absolute. Tomorrow, Maya would return to continue her development as an air traffic controller, working toward full certification, while applying skills that had been tested under the most demanding conditions her profession could present. She would mentor other trainees who showed potential that others might overlook, and she would continue developing coordination techniques that could improve air traffic operations throughout the system. But tonight, Maya Chen was simply a young woman who had discovered that patient preparation, careful observation, and the courage to act when action was needed could transform not just individual lives, but the safety and efficiency of systems that served thousands of people every day. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies that revealed stars Maya hadn't seen in months. As she drove home through streets that were finally quiet after the evening's chaos, Maya thought about the aircraft that were now safely parked at gates throughout Metropolitan, carrying passengers who would never know how close they had come to disaster or how much their safety had depended on coordination that had pushed the boundaries of human capability. Maya had spent 6 years learning to see patterns that others missed, and 4 hours proving that those patterns could save lives when applied with precision and courage. The transformation from invisible observer to essential professional was complete, but the knowledge and skills she had demonstrated would continue growing throughout a career that was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.